Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning. Welcome to today's live stream, which is really designed to give you a quick start into Capture One. So this is if you're in a trial or if you've recently purchased and you just want to know the basics. So what we're going to do today is cover everything from import to export, but only the small details, if you like. There isn't time to go through every single facet of each of those workflow steps. So that's importing, learning a bit about the interface, doing some editing, and exporting. So we'll cover all of those things, as I said, but we keep it nice and brief and nice and simple. And then you can explore the areas of the application which you need to get more detail in. And we'll point you towards some resources which you can use to enable you to do that. For those of you on YouTube and Facebook, welcome. Of course, we always like interaction. So if you'd like to put a question, do so in the comments and I'll be able to see that immediately. For those of you inside the webinar room, we've also got Victor and Helen who've joined us as well to help answering questions as well. So you've got three of us looking after you today. Okay, first of all, a couple of housekeeping things. If you are in the webinar room and you want to ask a question, just go to the Q&A tab, okay? And that will keep the questions separated out from the chat, so it's easier for Helen and Victor to find them. If you would like to hide the chat, just pop that arrow there, and that will give you a bit more room on screen to see Capture One. All right, let's go ahead and find Capture One and start our workflow process. Now we're going to come back to this photo or these pictures later on, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewind straight from scratch, and we'll start with a brand new catalog, import some pictures into that so you can see that process and pick up on a couple of things as well. So I'm going to close this down and we're going to say File, New Catalog. And in a second, I'll talk a little bit about the other file management options we have in Capture One, so you're aware. So let's call this Livestream PM. And I'm defining a location for my catalog, and I'll explain in particular what we're creating in a second, but by default your catalog document will be placed in your pictures folder. Now what this creates is a database, so a catalog, and this catalog knows the location of your pictures, very important, and it has all the adjustments stored for your pictures as well. And most RAW converters that have some kind of library or catalog work on this principle. So it's a non-destructive editor. So we don't physically edit the RAW files. We store adjustments inside a catalog, which shows you how the adjustments are looking in the application, in this case Capture One. So let's create this brand new empty catalog, and you'll see we have an empty Capture One where we can get started. Now if I look in my pictures folder, this is what you can see. I've created a Capture One catalog. It's very small right now because we haven't imported any pictures. It has no adjustment data, nothing, so it's super tiny. Now you can create as many catalogs as you wish. Some people work with one catalog and store all their photos within that. Other people work with several catalogs, either divided by years, subject matter, clients, or whatever. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's completely up to you. I personally have one single catalog which has all my photography in it. There's another method of file management which we won't go into today, which is called sessions. To give you an important distinction between the two, and we're going to break it down as simple as possible. A catalog is designed for a broad overview of all your work, so many pictures, and it has powerful ways to organize those pictures, search for them, filter them, and so on. So that's the purpose of a catalog. A Capture One session, which is a completely different type of file management, is designed for one project. So that could be a day shooting in the studio tomorrow. It could be a week-long location project and so on, but it's only designed for one project. It's not designed to store hundreds of thousands of pictures. It doesn't have ways to categorize and organize your pictures. It's simply designed for one project. So important distinction. If you want to know more about sessions, you can find that on all the resources which we have, which I'll talk about later. So right now we have a brand new empty catalog. Hopefully you'll notice that there's a very large import images button in the middle. So when you have an empty catalogue, that's obviously to give you a little visual cue of where to look next. It's the same button as the one up here in the top left, which says import, add photos to the current catalogue or session. So we're going to go ahead and click that. Once we've got some photos inside Capture One, we can talk a bit more about the interface. It's difficult to describe the interface when there's no pictures in it. So let's go ahead and import some. Okay. A second window will open up, and this is the import images dialog. Right now it's completely empty because we have no source folder selected. Always worth reading the information that you see on screen. It'll give you cues as to why something is empty, as an example, or why are you seeing certain images and not others. There will be an indication that you have a filtered collection and so on. So always read the messages that pop up on screen. First thing I need to do is decide where to import my photos from. So import from, and there's a choose button at the top. So we're going to tap that, and I'm going to import from an external hard drive. I'll talk about if you're going to import from memory card in a second, but right now I want to import some photos that already exist on my system. And I've got a folder here on a small external hard drive. It's just a small SSD drive, and it just contains 60, 70 odd images in here. So I'm going to say review for import, and that's going to simply show me the contents of that drive. Now, as they're on a fast external SSD, they pop up almost instantaneously. So a lot of the performance around Capture One is going to be based on, speed of hard drive, speed of computer, speed of internal drive, and so on. So right now I can see what photos are in this folder. If I was importing a folder which had a number of subfolders, as an example, if I just go to this external hard drive, if I wanted to import this folder and all these subfolders, as an example, no reason why I couldn't, then I could check this box, include subfolders. So that will bring in the parent folder that you've targeted and any subfolder after that as well. But we're just going to import this simple set. Now, the second thing that you have to pay attention to is import to. What do I want to do with these photos? And we've got a few options here. Add to catalog, copy into, and copy to folder. Add to catalog will do exactly that, and you'll see a little info text underneath. Your files will stay where they are. So we're not going to move them, we're not going to copy them, they're going to stay exactly where they are, but Capture One will know how to access them. This is what we call a referenced file. So Capture One references it at its current location. If I was importing from memory card, that would be a bad idea because I want to get them off the memory card and somewhere safe. So in that case, I would then choose copy to folder, and I would define where I want to copy them to. So quite often people grab their memory card, they stick it in a card reader, they dump it somewhere on their file system, and then they import into Capture One. You're actually being inefficient there. You might as well import directly from the memory card and specify in Capture One over here where you want to put them. That's one action. And of course you can do other things like add some metadata like your copyright information, your own personal information. You could add a style, you could add a preset. You can do a lot in that import process. So rather than copy them once to the computer and then import to Capture One, do it all in one step. Otherwise, everything you see thereafter is the same whether we're doing it from a hard drive or a memory card. So I'm going to simply say add to catalog. Now, that's the two things you really need to pay attention to. Everything else here is kind of bonus content, if you like. So as I said, we can add some basic metadata. We can add an adjustment to your photo. We can control a backup to go elsewhere. And there's also an option here to enable groups, which will automatically sort the photos into groups based on similarity. But today is about keeping it simple and not going into too much detail. So I'm just going to import everything. So down the bottom here, we can see a pick all button. So I'm going to tap that, and that's going to select every single picture for import. If I wanted to deselect something, let's say I don't fancy this shot, we can use the space bar as a toggle to pick something for import or not. But let's grab all 70 odd pictures because then you can see how fast the import is. So on a very basic level, choose where you want to import your pictures from and choose how you want to store them. So let's go ahead and say import all. Very important, let's just choose one picture. You will see a dialog box, depending how quick it is, of the import process. You do not have to sit here and wait for this to finish. This is simply telling you what's going on in the background. So if I want to go ahead, open up this picture and start editing it immediately, then there's nothing to stop me doing that. Do not feel you have to sit and wait for this progress bar to end. That's also inefficient. So as soon as you see a picture pop up into Capture One, you can start editing, color tagging, rating, and so on. So super important. Martin, you've answered your own question there. I have 160,000 photos in my catalogue. Should I start a new one? Everything is working fine. If it's not broken, no need to fix it. So yes. So I would leave that well alone. Just another example here from Captain Jack. I create a new catalogue every year. My catalogues are anywhere from 40,000 to 80,000 per year. So again, no real right or wrong way of doing it. Some people prefer to break them up into years for backup reasons, security, and all kinds of stuff. Okay, so we've got some pictures into Capture One. Now it's a lot easier to talk to you about the interface. Hopefully should be fairly self-explanatory, or at least a lot of it will be. So essentially the interface is split up into 4 different areas or zones, however you want to refer to them. So on the left-hand side we have tool tabs. So these are different tool tabs which contain different tools based on the title. So adjustment tools, style-based tools, tether tools, and so on. We can customize this area heavily, and we talk a little bit about customization in a minute. In the center we have the viewer. This shows you the currently selected photo over here on the right hand side, which is the browser. So in a vertical film strip. Again, you can customize this in many different ways. Along the top we have the toolbar. These contain some buttons like action buttons which turn things on and off, like a grid here as an example, exposure warnings, and so forth. In the middle are the cursor tools, and these change the behavior of my cursor. So right now I tend to always work with the pan tool on, because that means I can double click to zoom into 100%, and then I can scroll around, double click to zoom out to fit screen. And various other cursor tools do other things like select brushes, perspective tools, straightening tools, a whole bunch of other stuff. But if you can remember 2 shortcuts, it will help you navigate around Capture One. If I hover over the pan tool here, I get a handy hint what the tool is, a shortcut, which is H on the keyboard, and a link to watch a tutorial. So if you're not sure what any of these do, simply hover over it. Okay, that's my crop tool. I can see the shortcut is C, I can watch a tutorial, or I can go to a help site. So use those floating tooltips to enhance your learning of Capture One. So now I know, okay, crop is C and the pan tool is H, great. So if I want to switch to the crop, all I need to do is tap C on my keyboard, and then I've got the crop tool. And then if I want to go back to the pan tool, I can tap H. So if you can remember those 2 shortcuts, that will help you vastly move around Capture One a bit faster. In terms of customization, I would tell you that really no 2 people use Capture One in the same way. So yes, we design a default workspace, this one here, default, but no 2 people are likely to either stick with this workspace or use Capture One in the same way. So each of these areas can be customized quite heavily. So I can change the order of the tools that are in each individual tool tab. I can make myself floating tools. If I decide, well look, I'm never going to shoot tethered, so why do I have an entire tool tab wasting space? I can right click and just simply get rid of that tool tab. Bye bye, there we go. Perhaps I would like to add a tool tab, again by right clicking, which is purely based for color tools. So I can do that. Huge amounts of customization potential there. If we look in the view menu, you'll see each of those elements that I mentioned, the toolbar, the viewer, the browser, the tools, they all each have a shortcut next to them, which allows me to hide and show. So if I want to hide my browser, Command B on my keyboard, browser's gone. Bring the browser back, Command B. All of those shortcuts can be customized. And another shortcut which I would strongly recommend you learn or use is the ability to hide and show the viewer. So if you're working with Capture One like this, and you want to go ahead and find another picture, rather than scroll on a single film strip like so, it will be much easier for you to hide the viewer, locate your picture, double click, and then it will open up in the screen. Now by default, if my keyboard cam is working, by default that shortcut is G, but I actually find ergonomically it's much easier to use this button, which is the one that sits under my escape key. To change your keyboard shortcuts, edit keyboard shortcuts. There's probably about 500 different shortcuts you can customize if you wish. Rather than trying to dig your way through all the different categories and try to find the one you want, just use the search bar. So if I type in viewer, I can see that the key for show hide viewer has been changed to this. By default it's G, as I said. I find this one a bit more ergonomic. So if you want to make some shortcut keys more familiar to you, ones that you perhaps use with other applications, or it doesn't fit with the language keyboard you're using, then simply change them. It'll make your life much easier. Okay, moving on. Now in terms of catalog side of things, I'm not going to go into a massive amount of detail, and I did see a couple of other questions popping up. Why? Because if we go to our learn.captureone.com, you can see on January 26th, we're going to dedicate a whole live stream session to working with catalogs, organizing your images, and a couple of questions like Evgeny has just popped up about working with previews. So that will be a good opportunity to dig into all those kinds of things. Because if we go off on too many tangents, then you guys are going to get confused and probably we're going to run out of time. So the only thing that I'll mention today about catalogs is the first tool tab. So the library tool tab is where you manage your catalog. So right now, if I just expand this guy out, this tool tab is divided into 3 sections. So, or the library tool, I should say, is divided into 3 sections. We have catalog collections. These are fixed collections which show me the total number of photos in my catalog, regardless of where they're stored, regardless of which folder they are in. The 10 most recent imports. I'll do another one in a minute so you can see how this looks. Recent captures and the trash. So when you delete something from your catalog, it's not gone like that. You get an opportunity to recover from the trash if you wish. User collections, which is for defining things like albums and smart albums and a couple of other kind of organizational tools. Again, we can go into more detail with that later on in the month. But importantly, the folders tool shows you exactly where your pictures are. So we can see on my little external hard drive, there's one folder with 69 pictures in it, and there it is. Now, if I was to import something else, let's just go ahead and pick a different location. Let's grab this folder. No images in folder, that's helpful. Let's go elsewhere. Hang on a second. Catalog, demonstration images, there we go. Let's take something from Alex. Let's go to Thailand and review these for import. So we've got 79 odd images there. Now I'm not going to do another massive import, so if I just spacebar tap a few of these, let's just grab 4 pictures and import those. Again, they're going to add to my catalog, so they're not going to move. You can see here on the 5th of January at 4:49 we imported 4 pictures, and we can see here that's the exact location of those photos. That's the exact location of those photos. So the folders area shows you where your photos are. And again, these are being referenced. So Capture One hasn't moved them or anything. Capture One is referencing them where they are. All right. I think we're good for questions. Just a good comment from Jack. I use both catalogs and sessions. Good point. You do not have to restrict yourself to one. My weddings are imported as sessions, which works perfectly as it keeps that client's project in its own little container. Exactly. So as I said at the start, Catalogues, great for a broad overview. A session, very good for a single project, like a wedding, like a studio shoot, like a week-long project, something like that. All right, I'm going to shut this catalogue down now, and we're going to open that other one up because I had a few pictures in there which I prepared earlier. So I can say File, Open. I can point to this catalogue, Capture One 23, and open that up. Capture One will load it, and away we go. So checking my notes, the next thing that I want to talk about is tool behavior. So how the tools behave. So there's some commonality between the adjustment tools. There's a couple of things that if you're used to using other raw converters, you will recognize. And there are a couple of things that are different about Capture One as well, which is super important. So let's go to the Adjust Tool tab, and we're going to pull out the Exposure tool and give you a couple of tips on use of these tools. As you can probably guess, drag a slider. We can obviously increase a value or decrease a value. If you want to reset a slider, don't try and painstakingly move it back to 0. Double click anywhere on the slider bar, and that will take it back to 0. So double tap and we reset to 0. If we've done a bunch of adjustments on a picture and we want to preview what all of those adjustments are doing, there's a reset icon here. So if I tap that reset icon, that will reset them to 0. I'll just undo that. If I option click, so I'm holding down option on my keyboard, so option click like so, then it will temporarily reset them to 0. So you can see the effect of what a tool is doing. If I want to see what a single slider is doing, then I can long press on the name of that slider. So this is just previewing for me exposure or contrast. So that gives me an idea of what each of the adjustments are doing. So that's super, super handy just to dig into to see the effect of each of those individual adjustments. Now if I'd done, let's just whack in a few adjustments over here. If I'd done adjustments across multiple different tools and I want to see a before and after, then this is one of our buttons on the toolbar. So shortcut Y, if you want to remember that, or I can just tap and that gives me a slider to drag in between them. All right, let's reset that tool and reset this one. You can see there's some icons along the top here which are present in a lot of the tools. The first one is an auto function, which is why it's not present in every single one. We can't auto color edit, that wouldn't make sense, but we can auto adjust exposure as an example. The next one is a copy apply tool, which we'll come back to. Reset you've seen. The 3 lines allow you to save presets for that particular tool, as you can see. So you can save a custom preset. And the final one, the 3 dots, that's a sub-menu for each of the tools. And the contents here might vary a little bit. You'll find some which have a lot more options and some like this, which is relatively basic. But in general, what it allows you to do is to change the defaults for a given camera. So you can see here, this was shot with a D1X. So if you feel that your D1X always benefits from a bit more contrast, you can save that as a default for this particular camera. And then whenever you import pictures again from a 1DX, it will apply that adjustment automatically. Okay, let's reset that. So you'll see those icons pretty much appear on all the tools in Capture One. Some are missing, of course, where it doesn't make sense, like the auto adjustment, as I mentioned. Okay, let's edit a couple of pictures because that's best to see how the tools behave. Now, a lot of this terminology you will recognize from other applications that you're using, or if you're new to Capture One or new to photo editing in general, then this kind of terminology also makes sense in the photographic world, like exposure, contrast, saturation, and so on. But I would encourage you to forget what you know in terms of what you assume or how these adjustments will work and actually see the effect on your photos. So as an example, let's say we wanted to edit this picture. Now we can tell it's a bit dark. Looking at my histogram, we can see we don't have much information from midtones and highlights, and I would like to make it brighter. So the obvious thing to do is to raise up the exposure and to get something which looks a little bit more sensible. However, there's a super powerful slider in Capture One called brightness. And what brightness does, if we reset that, is a similar thing to exposure, but it has a little bit more control over the highlights. So you'll see if I bump up exposure to a similar amount, the helmet, the smoke, or sorry, not smoke, spray in the background is getting quite bright. The highlight on the bonnet is starting to get a bit on the bright side. You can see I'm losing some highlight detail there if I turn on the exposure warning. So exposure is great, but it will brighten everything by the same amount. Shadows, midtones, highlight, everything gets brighter. Brightness, on the other hand, has a little bit more control, and it will have some protection over the highlights. So this picture, I would do a combination of the two, so I can brighten it up so you can see the effect brightness is having, but it's going to have less of a dramatic effect on those highlights. So now I've got a more reasonable exposure adjustment, if you like, without my highlights getting too bright and out of control. Secondly, contrast. Quite often we're told, oh no, don't use a contrast slider, that's going to completely ruin your picture. If we were back in Capture One 7, which was 10 years ago now, probably more than that, I would agree with you. But since Capture One 8, there are significant changes to the contrast slider, where it means I am confident to tell you that this is a really great adjustment in Capture One. So if you want to add a little bit of contrast, I would tell you don't hesitate to use it. And also, don't feel that you can't push it maybe as much as other applications. Works especially good on skin tone. So quite often pushing a contrast slider will add saturation or redness to skin. That doesn't happen in Capture One, so don't be afraid to use it. And then finally at the bottom, saturation. This is closer to a vibrancy adjustment. And what I mean by that is that already saturated colors like the air intake here will get less treatment than something more subtle like the track or the wall here or the markings on the side of the track and so on. So it has a little bit of protection to those already saturated colors. Okay, so we've only adjusted exposure so far, and if we option click, we've made quite some drastic difference to the picture just by using one tool. Something that I would normally do with editing, but this picture didn't really need it, was to adjust white balance. The easiest way to do that is to manually drag the sliders or grab your color picker here and find something which is neutral gray, which I guess the track would make sense, or a tire or something like that. So I'm going to go with that. I feel the tire looks a bit too warm, so let's take that. Now looking at this tool, the high dynamic range tool, again, throw away what you think you know about these kind of tools and try it out in Capture One and see the effect it has on your pictures. So highlights and shadows, pretty self-explanatory. They control the brightness of the highlight and the shadow areas. We don't have a great deal of highlights in this picture, but I imagine if I ramp it down, the biggest effect is going to be here and also the spray in the background. So I can pull that down a bit. And this is a brighter area. You can see it has a little adjustment there as well. If I hover my cursor over the paintwork here, you can see the red value is actually pretty high, 248. So without that highlight adjustment, it might actually be blown out. Yeah, it is. So if I pull my highlight slider down, I can get a bit more detail back in that. Shadows, open up the shadows. So if we drag this slider to the right, you can see the effect it has on the picture. Now I would never open up the shadows that much, just because your camera is amazing and it has loads of dynamic range doesn't mean you have to ramp up sliders to maximum, because then you end up with an ugly HDR looking unrealistic picture. So obviously we need to be sympathetic, but you can see the range that the shadow slider is affecting. So that's affecting quite a lot of the car, some of the background, the tires and so on. If we move down to these two sliders, think of these as the real fine control of highlights and shadows, the endpoints of your tonal range. So if we open up the blacks here, you can see it's much more subtle. So look, if I do that to 100 and click on black, you can see it's really only affected the darkest tones in the middle, like so. Whereas our shadow slider, if we go up to maximum, had a much broader effect. So what can be nice, if you do want to open up the shadows, but then you lose a bit of that nice gritty contrast in the lower tonal ranges, we can actually go the opposite with the blacks. So I'm still getting my shadow recovery, but it's still retaining some nice contrast in those darker areas. So if we look at shadow recovery again, it's still opening up those shadows a bit, but what the blacks are doing is making sure it's not looking a bit too flat and uninteresting. So highlights and shadows affect the highlights and shadows. Whites and blacks, that's the real fine endpoints of the histogram. Matt says, good timely question, would the histogram on exposure evaluation change if you change the light and again on levels? And yes, if we get to the levels in a second, you will see that. So let's pop that back. Levels are a very misunderstood and underused tool, but it's a great tool, which you should definitely try to use in your workflow. So what we're looking at here is a bunch of sliders and a bunch of numbers, and it could be not very clear what's actually going on. But essentially, we're asking Capture One when we drag these sliders across, and we can either do that manually, or we can press Auto at the top. And Auto works great on this, to be honest. And that will just set the highlights and shadows to either end of our tonal range. And really what we're doing is, if you imagine you're grabbing hold of that histogram with your fingers and stretching it out to the numbers written at the top, that's what you're doing. So if I reset this and we compare this with our histogram, so this is how the output of the picture currently looks. If I say Auto, notice how that histogram then gets, the histogram gets broader because we're grabbing the end of it and stretching it out to the numbers we put at the top here. So if I pull this one in, you can see we're actually moving the histogram back, but I want to make sure I'm maximizing my tonal range all the way from shadows to highlights. And what this means, if I reset that, wrong button, sorry, reset this one here. If I auto, you can see we get a bit more contrast, a bit more punch. Having this dead information at either end of the histogram just leads to a flat picture. So we want to try to avoid that. Now, if you feel it's a bit too strong, of course, you can manually pull that out if it's made your highlights too bright or your shadows too dark. So don't be afraid to manually tweak it as well. Let's put you back. Finally, we're going to come to the color editor with a different picture. Another tool which I would suggest you start trying to use early on. So we've only picked out white balance, exposure, high dynamic range, levels and clarity. If you were to restrict yourself to only using those 5 adjustment tools, you could still take your image adjustment a long way. They are very powerful but very simple. So don't feel that you have to use every single tool in the arsenal. It doesn't make sense. There was a good question that came up on YouTube a couple of days ago. And the question was trying to ask me or encourage us to produce a video that showed you the exact 10 steps that you should always take, and for each kind of genre. So what are the 10 steps for a portrait? What are the 10 steps for a landscape? What are the 10 steps for a motoring picture, and so on? And I would say that is not a good editing philosophy to go down. I would say your steps don't vary on genre, they vary on picture. And those steps that you are going to take will also vary. So some pictures will need a lot of editing, some pictures will need a very small amount. But to try and force yourself into an editing workflow is probably not going to be fun and not necessarily going to get you the best result. So something I would probably always do is white balance and exposure, but everything thereafter is purely based on what you need to do from a creative point of view and what you need to do from a correction point of view. So try not to get too bogged down on the technicalities of photo editing. It should be fluid, it should be organic, should be interesting as well. All right, clarity. So the last one I would encourage you to use. Clarity is a kind of contrast adjustment, but it avoids working with the shadows and it avoids working with the highlights, which means we can generally push it quite hard and get a nice adjustment without losing all our shadow detail. So you'll see if I just go into the depths of this not an air intake, I guess some kind of aerodynamics, you can still see with the red, green and blue values we've got detail there. So if we took our contrast slider and went a bit nuts with it, see we've now run out, we've got no shadow detail there whatsoever. So where was this? Around there. Whereas if we boost up our clarity, we get a really nice punchy contrast effect to the photo, but we don't lose our shadow detail and we still hang on to our highlight detail as well. Should you use this on every picture? I would say it wouldn't be great for a portrait unless you wanted to accentuate, you know, a face of character, if we can say that in a flattering way. But generally it's not something I would use on skin. Now structure does a similar thing, but on a very micro level. Now I probably wouldn't use it on this picture because you can see we have a tiny amount of motion blur, which is to be expected really. So what structure might do, it could exacerbate any, you know, noise or sharpness. It might make the spray look good, but I would probably apply some structure selectively in this case. I wouldn't globally put it over the whole picture. But for something, if we just switch pictures a second, for something like this Venice, where we've got loads of nice architectural detail, a few points of structure would really enhance that. But again, it's a tool which I would suggest you use in the lower values. Bumping it up to crazy high stuff starts to look digital and not pleasant. So going back to this shot, I would have maybe a couple of points of structure, but I would definitely exercise caution because of the way the picture is. Right, let's put clarity back away. Oh, there are different clarity methods. Some are older methods, like punch adds a bit more saturation, which might be nice on this picture. Neutral is an older algorithm of how we calculate clarity, and classic is a really old algorithm. 99% of the time, stick with natural. If you want a bit of punch, then you'll find the saturation goes up slightly between natural and punch. So that might be a nice candidate for this shot. Carl says clarity is for midtones. Yeah, it just has more effect on the midtones. There is protection to the highlights and shadows, which means that you don't ruin your shadow detail as I showed, and you don't ruin your highlight detail. All right, so very simple adjustments, but you know, a pretty nice result in the end of the picture, as you can see. Improved exposure, contrast, color, the whole lot. Let's have a look at, just a quick time check, a couple of other shots. We'll look at the color editor. Also, actually, before we get to that, just to show you what I mean with the whites and blacks. If we pull down the highlights with this picture, you can see it's affecting the sky, it's affecting the wall on the right hand side, has quite a broad effect over the picture. If we grab our whites and pull that down, you can see it has a bit of an effect on the sky, but not so much. And it has more of an effect on the wall here on the right hand side. If we look at the histogram itself, and look at this peak here and look at this peak. So if I pull the highlights down, see that little blue bump on the blue channel gets pushed quite a long way to the left. We can probably guess, you know, a lot of that information is coming from the sky. So if we pull that to the left, you can see those two peaks move quite dramatically. If we grab our white slider, watch these two peaks again and pull this across, notice the blue peak doesn't actually move as much, whereas this peak on the right hand side, this guy here, which is an extreme highlight, has much more of an effect, like so. Same with blacks and whites. If I fully open the shadows, we get to this point, but notice there's this blue peak here. So if I open up the blacks, this starts to stretch this across. Now this shot, if we look at it unedited, is actually pretty underexposed. So that's the shot as it came out of camera. So there's not a lot of detail cooking in these shadows, which is why you're not seeing the same level of recovery that you could see in other shots. So if I even pull open the blacks and the shadows, we've actually reached the limit of what the sensor can record, because this is just too dark, too underexposed to recover. But again, just because we can recover all this detail and highlights does not mean you should edit a picture like this. So please exercise a bit of caution with the power of what these sliders can do. Okay, let's pop you back, and then we're going to look at the color editor, which is going to be this picture, and we're going to edit this from scratch. So first of all, the whole point of editing this picture is really to look at the color editor, but we can still do some other stuff. First of all, we would expect the horizon to be straight. And just so you know, in the rotation and flip tool, the auto function here will try to auto rotate based on the image content. So if I click on auto, actually does a pretty nice job. Doesn't need to have a horizon in it for it to work. It can have, let's just find something, so people-y here as an example. If I auto rotate this, then it again will make an assessment based on the image and decide how it needs to be rotated. So you can see this is probably a little bit off. If we hit auto, then it rotates and makes the people straight. So 80% of the time it's super effective, and it saves you some time in manually rotating pictures. Okay, let's crop this a bit. So I'm going to pull up the crop down here. Let's crop in slightly. If you right click whilst you have your crop cursor tool, you can pick your different aspect ratios, or you can add custom aspect ratios as well. Most of the cursor tools, if you right click, will give you a little bonus tool. So if I zoom into 100% and right click with the pan tool, I can actually move around my picture like so. If I'm on the, let's go back to adjust. If we're working with curves, and I've got the curve point picker, so if I want to pick a curve point here and I right click, we actually get a little curve tool pop up as well. So a temporary curve tool, which is nice. I think I can I make that one bigger? No, but if you want to keep your eyes closer to where you're editing, then you can do so. So try right clicking with any of the cursor tools, you'll get a little bonus. All right, that was a side step. Let's reset that curve. What do I want to do to adjust this picture? It's a little bit on the dark side, so I'm going to brighten it slightly. But I've got lots of detail in the sky and the boat, so I don't want to go too crazy with exposure. I'm going to pull my highlights down a touch. Shadows, I think I'm going to leave alone. There is no real shadow to recover. So I don't want to lose depth in the picture. And I shall add some contrast. It's looking a bit flat. I will also add a little bit of clarity as well, and hit auto on my levels. Little word of warning about auto leveling is that if you've made an adjustment to your levels and you then go back and think, actually I'd like to punch in a bit more contrast, or I'd like to brighten it a bit, just go back and make sure you're not clipping any data. And when I say clipping, it means you're cutting off information in the histogram. Then you get ugly artifacts like this, and you'll lose all your shadow and highlight detail. So if you do make some further changes after auto leveling, just go back and hit auto again to make sure you're not cutting off any of that data. So if we find our color editor, expand this out. Color editor has 3 modes of operation: basic, advanced, and skin tone. We are just going to look at basic today. Essentially, the difference with advanced is that it allows you greater control of color ranges. You can pick up to 25 different ranges. You have an extra dimension of adjustment and so on. So if you need to do very accurate or very broad color range adjustments, then you can go advanced. But the basic color editor, you can still do a lot. So what I want to do is change the color of the sea, because I don't like this murky, muddy color that's going on. I want to enrich the blue of the sky a bit, and I want to make these less orange and more red. Okay, so I'm going to grab my color picker and pick down here in the sea, and Capture One has identified the dominant color of where I've picked. Now, grabbing my hue slider, I can either push it to its neighbor on either side. So if I drag the slider to the right, it's going to transform the picked color to its nearest neighbor on the right. If I drag the slider to the left, it's going to transform that dominant color to the nearest neighbor on the left. So I want to go right. So if I do that, then gradually you see it gets transformed to its neighbor. Now I don't want to go that far, so I'll probably go something like this, make it a bit brighter and take out some saturation. So now if we option click, we've gone from this to this. Same with the sky, grab my picker, click on the sky. This is my dominant color blue, so I'm going to make it darker and add a bit more saturation, like so. Finally, with the crates on the side, I'm going to pick once more and say I want this to be more red, so I'm going to go in this direction. So if I go this way, eventually if I go too far, it's going to start going pink, so I don't want that. And then I'm going to up the saturation and darken it down a touch, like so. Now if you like, there's a slightly different method that you can do. So you've seen the pick and play method. So if I just pick on the side of the boat here for as an example. Oh, I think my cursor just got stuck on. Hang on. There we go, it's better. So if I pick on the side of the boat as an example, so go around here, we can see what's going on. Now the other method that I mentioned is something called the direct color editor. So if I click and hold, so let's make a virtual copy. So I'm going to clone this variant. If I bring up the browser so you can see it, we've got two versions of this picture, or two variants. So if I go ahead and say clone variant, it's going to make me a virtual copy with all the same adjustments. I'm going to reset my color edits, and we're going to do the same thing with the direct color editor. So instead of clicking and adjusting, what we can do is long press on the color that we want to edit. Now, as soon as I press on the C like so, you'll see a little four-way cursor pop up, and then it will disappear. Now, because I'm using a screen sharing application, the system is still picking up the cursor. But what will actually happen when you use it in Capture One is that as soon as you click, you'll see that four-way cursor and then it disappears. But it's actually useful that it's still showing, because now you can see what happens. So if I drag my mouse to the left, then you'll see it starts to adjust the hue. So, or I can go in this direction like so. If I want to change the saturation, I can drag my cursor up, or I can drag my cursor down. And if I want to change lightness, what I need to do is hold my option key down and drag my cursor to the left. And now I'm adjusting lightness. So you can very quickly move around. So if I go to the blue sky again, long press, I said I wanted to make this more saturated. So I'm going to move my cursor up, and I want to make it darker. So I'm going to hold down option and drag to the left. If I wanted to change the hue, let's go in this direction, I would drag to the right. Same with the crates, long press. I want to put the hue in this direction, I want to up the saturation, and I want to make it a bit darker. So it can be really fast to edit that way, but maybe when you're first learning Capture One, you do the pick and adjust, and then once you get a little bit faster, you can use that direct color editor method. So click and hold with the picker. So let's go on the side of the boat, and then as soon as you start moving, you can't quite see my, hang on, let's go a bit wider. You can't quite see my cursor, so I'm going to click on the side of the boat here, and then as soon as I start moving, you see it's dragging that hue slider back and forth. So nice way to do it. Another benefit of this is that you can see it's picked two color swatches, so we're now affecting two color ranges at the same time, whereas the other method you can only do it one at a time. Nice one. All right, how are we doing for time? We've got 10 minutes left. So what we need to look at is a little nudge to something maybe a little bit more advanced, copy and apply, and then export. And all of those things are pretty swift. So one thing that I wanted to show you was to, first of all, let's crop this a bit tighter, is to give you a hint as a super cool feature in Capture One, which is layers. Now, again, we could talk for an entire hour on working with layers, but there's a tool in Capture One called Style Brushes, which is a fast introduction into working with layers. And there's a super simple example in this. So this picture, I want to brighten it up a little bit. Again, we've got lots of highlight detail on the racing suit, so I want to be a bit careful with exposure. So I'll open up my brightness and let's throw in a vignette like so. And I want to open up the exposure, if you like, just on the top of his head. It's got a bit dark because he's just sitting in the shadows slightly. So if I go to style brushes and find light and contrast, these are preset brushes that do certain things that are described here, like add contrast, bring back some highlights, but I'm going to just grab dodge, brighten. Now this selects my brush cursor tool automatically. It sets up the brush specifically for this task, and it sets up the adjustments specifically for this task as well. I'm going to right click and make this brush a bit smaller, and then without doing anything else, just start brushing away on his head. And that's opened that up quite nicely, so it's now evened it out. It's created a new layer for me called dodge, which I can turn off and on, so you can see the effect. And I can also change the opacity if I've overcooked it a little bit. I could do something else, like if I wanted to, let's say if I had gone a bit nuts with my exposure tool and I wanted to just recover the highlights here, we could do highlights recover, make my brush a little bit bigger. And then I could wipe over here and just bring some of those highlights back in the suit, and actually maybe a little bit on his face as well. Now we've got a separate layer called highlights recover. If I turn this off and on, you can see the effect that's happening. Opacity to moderate it if I've done too much. There's loads of different ways you can create layers in Capture One. You can do radial ones, you can do graduated masks, you can do automatic masks based on pixel density, on color, tons of stuff. It's awesomely powerful, but to get you started, have a look at style brushes as a fast way to think about how layers can enhance photo editing. So that's layers. That's the briefest explanation on layers I've ever done. More specifically, that's style brushes, which are an accelerated way to use layers. But anyone can use it. Like on this picture, if I wanted to open up the shadows in there a bit, I would grab, where are we, shadows recover, make my brush a bit smaller, and then just paint in these areas like so. And the more I brush, the greater the effect is. Now that's probably a little bit too much, so I could just pull my opacity down to something that was more realistic. So it's such an easy way to locally edit on your picture. Copy and apply, that's something I wanted to mention. So let's go to, let's just grab a sequence of pictures that are similar. So what do we got here? Let's go for, let's go for Annalise and Billy. Just finding a sequence of, pictures shot in an identical situation. Here we go. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 shots, which we want to edit identically. So let's do a really fast edit. So I'm going to bump up the exposure a tad, control my highlights. Let's warm it up with the white balance because it looks a bit on the cool side. Let's have a touch of contrast, and let's throw in a vignette. Now this works with 2 adjustments or 20 adjustments. It doesn't make any difference. So let's go for copy up here in the top right. So this will add those adjustments to the adjustments clipboard. And then I'm going to select the rest of the pictures and we're going to say apply. And then those adjustments come across. So if I undo that and just hit apply again, then those adjustments come across. Simple as that. Really handy tip which works with any adjustment. Let's just show it to you with crop. Let's say I've adjusted the crop and I want to copy this crop across to the other pictures. Rather than going to copy and then finding my, where is it? My adjustments clipboard and then deselecting everything and then finding, where is it, the crop, and then applying it across, that's a lot of steps. So what we can do instead is that, if you remember right at the start of the session, I mentioned we had this little copy and apply button in each of the tools. All I need to do is tap that and say apply, and then the crop goes across. Even faster, if you hold your shift key down, that simply suppresses that dialog and does it instantly. And this works with any tool. So if I decide, oh, okay, I actually want to bring the highlights down a little bit. So if I pull the highlights down more and then shift click, then that's going to do that across. If I pull them back up, shift click, that's going to adjust them all like so. Also, something which is a unique and super awesome tool in Capture One, if I just open this up. If you look at your edit keyboard shortcuts, speed edit keys, take note of the tool and the key in question. So let's look at exposure, which is Q on my keyboard. If I do this and hold down Q on the keyboard, let's just come out the crop, then notice exposure shows up underneath. So you can see a little exposure slider. And then if I want to adjust the exposure without even looking at the tools, let's hide the tools, then I can just drag my cursor left and right, and now I'm adjusting exposure at the same time for each of those pictures. So now if I want to adjust white balance, I can hold down 1 on my keyboard and bump up the Kelvin. I could hold A, which will give me the highlights, and then control all the highlights. So if you're doing volume adjustment, speed edit works brilliantly. So if you're thinking, wow, that looks cool, then again, take yourself to the tutorial for that particular function, because speed edit is revolutionary if you want to work nice and quickly. What did I say we were going to do? Copy and apply, export, that's it. So let's go back to that collection of pictures. You can see this library tool is much busier in this catalog because I've got 8,000 pictures here. You can see the last 10 imports. You can see various organization that I've done here. So I've got different albums of different pictures organized into projects, organized into groups. So again, if that's interesting for you, join the session later on in the month where we will go into this in much more detail. So what did we edit today? We edited 1, 2, where's our boat? 3 pictures. So I'm just command clicking them, as you can see. So I see we've still got the overhead camera on. So 1, command click, 2, 3, option if you're on a PC. And we want to export these out to our final formats. How do we do that? Click on the export button. This will open the export window, which will show you, and this is really important, exactly how the pictures are going to look once you export. So exactly how the pictures are going to look in terms of size, sharpness, a whole bunch of other stuff. Now it's based on a premise of using export recipes. So these are presets for exporting your pictures. It comes with a number of built-in presets, but you can easily make your own, and let's do that right now. So we're going to use this one, full-size JPEG at the highest quality. Actually, let's go TIFF. Full-size TIFF at the highest quality. And I also want to make a smaller JPEG export. So to make myself a new export recipe, I'm going to say plus, a new recipe. And we're going to call this JPEG, let's say 3000 pixels across, like so. We can organize these, so let's just move that recipe so these two are next to each other. Now the TIFF one is a built-in recipe, so it's already set up, but we need to set this JPEG up. So I want it to be a JPEG, and I want the quality, let's just knock that down a bit. I want the color profile to be sRGB. Why do I have so many? Hang on, I should say show recommended. I think it's down the bottom. Show recommended. I don't need to see all of those. sRGB, there we go. And the scale, I want the width to be in pixels, and I want that to be 3000. 1, 2, 3. Or actually, let's do the longest edge. So the longest edge, I want to be 3000 pixels. 3, 1, 2, 3, like so. Now notice, if I change my fit up here to 100%, and I change between my different recipes, notice that our racing driver here gets smaller and larger. Because as I said, this is showing you exactly how the export is going to look. So my JPEG at 3000 pixels is resizing it slightly smaller. So one thing that I can do and use this window for is that I would like to put some output sharpening, because when we make a picture smaller or larger, we actually reduce the sharpness to some extent. So I want to compensate for that. So by adding this output sharpening, I can then drag my slider, and it's only a subtle amount of sharpening. You can see it in his hair actually in particular. If I drag this across, it's just improving the sharpening. So we're going to have a little bit of extra sharpening like so, and I could check this picture, and I could check this picture. I could go to my TIFF recipe and check this picture and say, okay, yep, it's all looking good, nice and sharp, and so on. But it's important that you realize that this viewer proofs to the exact output. Now we need to define where these exports are going. So the first time you go into this export window, you're going to see a choose button here. So let's say choose, and I'm going to make a folder here just called catalog exports. Choose folder. So now if we look at my TIFF export recipe, it's also using the same location. So when you first define that location, until you make new export recipes, they're all going to use that location. But again, a really important note is that any export recipe can have its own unique location. So that can be really useful, like if you want to export to cloud storage like Dropbox or something like that. I could have an export recipe that goes specifically to my Dropbox, whilst the other recipes are going to my computer. There's loads of stuff you can do with export recipes, which we won't have time to look at, but it's hugely powerful for export and distribution. Okay, so if we go ahead and say export, let's see what happens. So we're going to export 3 pictures. Let's go to my pictures folder. There's catalog exports, and then we can see the pictures going in. There's my JPEG, which was resized to 3000 pixels. You can see just there. And there's our full-size TIFF, which is just the maximum that we have. Now it's a little bit inconvenient because they're all jumbled together. So I'll show you one decent trick with export recipes, and then that will be the end. So what we can ask Capture One to do is to sort our exports based on various metadata on the picture, and it helps if I actually choose some pictures. So let's grab those 3 again. So let's say I want to sort these pictures into subfolders based on their format or the recipe that I'm using. So in the TIFF recipe here, we can see subfolder. I could write TIFF like so, or what I can do is pick something called a token, and a token takes some kind of metadata from the picture and uses that to create a folder. It could be the color tag, could be the star rating, could be the serial number of the camera, could be today's date, all kinds of different options. But I'm going to use the one called recipe name and drag that in there. And we're going to do the same for my JPEG export recipe and find recipe name and drag that in there as well. So now both of these export recipes have this token which is saying, hey Capture One, drop it in a subfolder with the same name as the recipe name. So did I empty that folder out? No. So let's just delete all the stuff here. Whoops, I managed to delete that folder as well. Let's undo. I just want to delete those. So now when I say export and we go back to this, we can see I've got a folder called JPEG 3000 pixels across, and those pictures are going in, and then we've got our TIFF recipe folder with the TIFF files in, like so. So that's a tiny percentage of cool stuff that you can do with export recipes, but it's a really powerful way to distribute. Quite a lot of people use Capture One as that distribution engine. So let's say even with their final retouched complete PSD files, if you need to resize that file into a web size one, a social media one, full size one, etc., then it's really fast to do it in Capture One than manually exporting from Photoshop, as an example. All right, last 2 things. I saw a question come up, which tablet am I using? It's quite an old one now. Hint, hint, Wacom. It's you can see that it's a Wacom. It's an Intuos medium-sized one, rather beaten up now from years of use. But I find it incredibly convenient to work on as opposed to using a mouse, especially if you're doing local adjustments, working with masks and layers, it's much easier to use a pen compared to a mouse, I feel. So that's one question that came up. The other thing is different resources. So as a reminder, don't forget to use these. So hover over the different elements of Capture One, gives you the shortcut key, a link to a tutorial, and if I click on this, a link to our support site. So there we go, loads of fabulous information there. So don't forget to use those, or you can go to support.captureone.com and type in a search term. Let's say I want to learn about curves. Hit enter, the curve tool overview. Happy days. So there's loads of resources on support.captureone.com. That's one place you can go. You can also go to YouTube, which is at Capture One, as you can see, or just search for Capture One as I did here, and it will take you straight to the channel. And then you can see upcoming and recorded live streams. So this one is going right into here as we speak. If you're watching the recording, there should also be some chapters. So I will add in the next 24 to 48 hours different chapters so you can skip ahead or skip back to various different points, because I realize it's tricky to find your way around 60 minutes of content. So there will be chapters added to this as well, just maybe not immediately. You can also go to, where are you? Learn.captureone.com. And as I said, if you want to come up at the end of the month to solid strategies for better image organization, which is all the catalog stuff, because we can talk for an hour about that, then please do so. You just need to click on this and then you can hit the blue button to sign up. There's also one coming up on January the 19th, which digs in a bit more detail on levels, curves, contrast sliders, all the differences between those different things and when to use them. So this is learn.captureone.com. One caveat that I should mention, tutorials, webinars and tool introductions, which are little short, snappy, relatively short, 43 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, introductions on specific tools. This webinars and tutorials, they're going to actually move over to support.captureone.com. So everything is in one place. So you don't have to go to two different sites. Doesn't really make sense. Everything will get dropped onto support.captureone.com as your one-stop shop for learning Capture One. Okay, so there we go. So hopefully we had time to answer all your questions. I'm sure Helen and Victor have been busy. Yes, they have. Helen and Victor have been busy answering questions as well. So thanks to you both for answering that as well. Okay, so takeaways from today. Don't be scared, I think is the most important thing. Don't feel you have to use every single tool in Capture One's arsenal. Stick with the 4 or 5 basic ones to see how far you can get. Start to explore working with layers and style brushes is really important. And please, please, please customize, because you'll have a much better experience if you take away the stuff that you're not using and bring to the surface the tools that you want to use regularly. And also in that case, don't forget to save your workspace or save several workspaces. Some people have different workspaces for editing, different workspaces for exporting and so forth. So you can have multiple different workspaces that you can use. You can see here, mine has been evolving, version 5, version 6, version 7. So you're always tweaking it and adjusting it. So my workspace probably looks quite a bit different to the default. It made sense for me to use the default today. And I also use little icons. So I've got a export one here, so as opposed to going into the export dialog, I have access to the export tools here. I have a specific one for style brushes and layers. I have a color one and so forth. So there's lots of different ways that you can build the interface, and that's definitely something you should look towards doing. Great, thanks for joining me today. Hope that was useful, and see you all again, hopefully during this month and at the end of the month if you want to know more in depth. So take care and enjoy your weekend when it comes. Bye now.